Great. Well, welcome everyone to Tools for Empowering Teams. We're on session 5 of 8, and you'll be spending the next hour, 45 minutes to an hour with Matt Rusa and myself. Next slide. This is a funding disclaimer that the views expressed within the training and within the materials do not necessarily reflect the official views of the Department of Health and Human Services. Always, we want to avoid using stigmatizing language, and so we never want to describe somebody as their disease or their diagnosis, and the words we use matter. And this is a pathway to technical assistance through the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, and so beyond trainings like this, you can always submit a request for support through our website. Someone from the coordinating center would reach out to you and match you up with one of our team leads. So, like, I lead the team overseeing RCO capacity building. And then we meet with you and kind of go through those needs and hook you up with one of our consultants that can provide resources, coaching, guidance to help you work through whatever you're working on. And always, if you're not speaking, please try to keep your line muted. It's helpful when you come off of mute to just introduce yourself, just your name and maybe your organization. The first couple times, if you respond several times, don't feel the need to do it every single time. During the presentation, feel free to submit any comments or questions into the chat, and Matt and I monitor that during the session. So if you don't want to come off mute, feel free to submit things during the chat. And then after the final session, we will do a short evaluation. And I think that's all from me, and I'm going to hand it over to Matt.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks very much. Hi, everybody. It's good to be back with you again this week. I hope you're all doing well. We're going to continue to talk about tools. As always, we like to give folks a chance to, if you have any reflections on any of the tools that we have talked about previously, feel free to share in the chat or out loud, or if you have questions after thinking about one of the tools that we may have discussed and you maybe tried something or are thinking about trying something and maybe have a question about how to implement that or how to some of the details that might help you, feel free to ask now out loud or in the chat, or always to email and ask a question if we can do something to help you as you're working to use some of these tools. Always find that it's best to try tools right after you hear about them, right after you've been actively thinking about them or considering them, because that is the best time to get moving and to have some momentum. You know, we all know what happens when you get an idea and then it sort of sits for a while. It becomes challenging to move it forward. So go ahead and encourage you to try to use some of these tools as soon as you are able, as soon as they make sense for you. So we're doing this series in 3 parts: knowing your partners, knowing the environment, your organization, and knowing your plan. So the charting of the course of where you want to go. And today we'll start talking about some tools in relation to charting your course. Once you've used some of these other tools to figure out what's going on in your environment, maybe understanding yourself and your team and the environment, then okay, so what do we need to do? What strategies might we want to try to implement in order to move something forward? So we're going to start talking about some tools that are really good for planning purposes. Excuse me. And one is nominal group technique. This is a really common one that we use a lot. It's sort of foundational to all the NITEC stuff that we do, and it's really useful in a lot of other areas as well. It's a pretty universal kind of a tool. It's one of those tools that you can use for many different situations and circumstances when you're trying to do some form of brainstorming and to come up with ideas for something. Often used to determine strategies. What should we do next, or how should we proceed? And you can brainstorm a lot of other things as well. So So I want to give you a little sense of how this nominal group technique brainstorming works, and then maybe do a little bit of a practice and show you what it's like to actually do one. So so let's spend a little bit of time talking about this. The core here is to come up with ideas, change ideas, or any new ideas to make a list for consideration. This is a group process. It is designed to be done as a group rather than as an individual. Brainstorming typically is a group process where we're trying to engage the all the wisdom and knowledge of a group of people. By the way, when you think about doing this, if you were to do it live with a group of people, whether through a video conference like this or live in a room, you probably want to max out at about 10 or 12 at the absolute top. If you have a larger group, you'd want to do this nominal group more than one time, right? Break it into smaller groups. You can even break it into smaller groups and have the two groups answer the same question and then just pull all the information together. But if you get bigger than that, it becomes kind of slow and takes a longer time to get around the room with engaging people, and so the energy kind of gets drained out of it, and you usually don't get as strong of a result. So try to keep it somewhere, 5 or 6 people at the minimum, up to 10, 12 is a nice range for doing this. If you're doing it where you're not doing it in a live meeting, where you're doing it asynchronously across time, for example, when I show you the steps, that'll make more sense. But if you're using surveys to gather information, then you can do it with a larger group. But I'll come back to that at the point at which it makes sense to talk about that a little bit. So the first thing I want to ask you is, what is brainstorming like for you? And my picture covered my question mark. There is a question mark there. What's brainstorming like for you? Um, Give me some feedback, particularly if brainstorming is sometimes not the most pleasant experience for you. Some of you may have thoughts about this. How do you experience brainstorming?
I'll start us off. Uh, One of the things that I usually hear about brainstorming or experiences that people tend to want to squash or uh, uh, criticize, ideas and instead of just allowing all the ideas at first. And then the other big thing is that sometimes not everybody gets a voice. So the group think tends to move things in a direction without actually hearing all the input.
Yeah, those are two really important ideas, Mark. The structure of nominal group technique is designed to address both of those things. The judgment factor, brainstorming tends to have a lot of judgment when it's not structured, and that will inhibit people, and that will reduce the creativity, reduce the number of ideas that people share. So we want to use these steps that I'll share with you as a way to ensure that there's less judgment. Also, we want to make sure that we have everyone's voice included, that there isn't that group think that others' individual specific experience and voice that comes to the table and is shared in the list of ideas, and the structures are designed to do that as well. So thanks for sharing those. Those were a couple of really important parts. What about others? What do you think as it relates to brainstorming? Maybe challenges that you have in doing it, or parts that you might not be crazy about when you do brainstorming? I see we have in the chat a couple of ideas. Fatima said, "I'm constantly brainstorming. I keep a pen and sticky pad on me at all times." It's a good idea. Always coming up with good creative ideas. Christina says, "I struggle with it, especially, but it's a topic that I did not have prior knowledge. So then I just sit there while others talk. Then I think of things after the brainstorm is over." Right. The pacing can be an interesting issue. Some of us tend to be kind of spontaneous, quick pace works for us. We kind of just come up with ideas on the fly. Others of us like to be more contemplative. And I was talking to my nephew the other day, who's a very bright guy and very thoughtful and kind of introverted. And he says when he's at work, almost every brainstorm, it's at the end of the brainstorm when it's all over that his ideas are ready. He's ready to share, but it's over, so he can't share them. So how do you create an environment, as you're saying, where people have a chance to share, as Christina's describing, because that's a common dilemma. Um, Uh, Leo says, if I can have a thought and share it with others, that means I feel safe. Right. So an environment that feels safe and comfortable for everyone to be able to trust the sharing. That's where that judgment piece comes into play. If ideas are shared and someone else shoots them down, of course, that inhibits everyone, and there isn't a felt sense of comfort and trust. It doesn't feel like a safe space if that's what's happening. So that tends to create a group who have power, who are kind of controlling and doing a thumbs up, thumbs down on everyone's ideas. And then certain folks are just not going to feel comfortable and safe in sharing if that's the environment. Stacy, I ruminate on a subject, uh, keep it to myself until I have a full-fledged idea. Sometimes it feels obsessive, but it works for me most of the time. That's an interesting sharing there, Stacy, because when we do brainstorming, our hope is that we can have the ideas in their in their in their raw state, right? Their kind of half-baked state. And what you're doing is what many people do, which is why brainstorms often create a small list because everyone's saying, I don't want to share it until I've got it figured out. Well, you're not going to have it figured out during the meeting probably, or you won't get to that, so we don't share it unless it's one that we've all been thinking about for a long time. So this happens all the time. So the structure should create safety so that people can throw out an idea, so that they don't have to say, I know this is probably not a good idea, but I hope this isn't a silly, but we all tend to apologize for our ideas before we share them, so that no one has to do that, where it's just, hey, here's an idea. Who knows? Who knows where it might go, but it's an idea. I think we should pay everybody $1 million and then everyone would be really productive. Hey, it's an idea. Throw it out there, put it on the list. It's totally impractical and it will never happen. It doesn't matter. It's an idea, right? Let's not be afraid of ideas, and let's be comfortable knowing that it's okay, that it's half baked. It's interesting. I'm using a baking metaphor. You're using a bird metaphor, full-fledged. I think that means that the bird is mature and it can fly. I think that's what that means. I like it. Some places you can feel the power in the room, being able to offer the power to everyone. Yes, it's helpful because some can't think that quickly. Yes, some people are quick, some people are not quick. It has nothing to do with their capacity, has nothing to do with their creativity. It's the way that they process, right? Some people process very rapidly. Some people process at a more methodical, slower pace. And the problem is we don't create a space that allows for those slower processors to have the space to be able to formulate and then share, and we lose out. We lose out on their ideas if we structure it improperly. Sometimes I'll just jot things down and then listen to what others are saying. If nobody brings up what I thought, then I share or expand on what others have said. So Carrie's kind of in a position of deferring to others to go first, and if they don't share it, then sharing it after. Um, which I think a lot of people do, right? So what we actually want is, in a perfect environment for brainstorming, we want everybody's voice to be clearly heard. And so you'll see the structures that I'm going to share with you and how they do that, so that you're not deferring, that you're sharing your voice, that people get to hear you, and that they get to associate the idea with you instead of associating it with someone else. Some people might argue that, well, it doesn't matter as long as somebody shares the idea. What I would say is there's an opportunity for building team and building collaboration and building a sense of community with sharing of ideas above and beyond the content. That process is meaningful. So it's important to hear everyone's voice. Even if the idea would have been there, whether or not you spoke, I want everyone to speak because that's part of building the community of the group. So that's an important part of a brainstorming process as well. So the whole thing of brainstorming starts with a good question. I like to use this idea of altitude when I talk about the question, right? So maybe one of you has been to a brainstorming where the question just like didn't work. How do we make this place better? Everybody share your ideas. What does that mean? I mean, that's such a broad question. So that the question of that question's altitude, it's too high in the sky. Um, The other flip side problem is something that's just so specific that it really isn't a wide open question, right? So we have to find a good question. Anybody have an example of something that you've used or that you've experienced as a brainstorm question lately that you could share out loud? I'm curious. Can you think of a group brainstorming and a question that you encountered or that you used?
How can I help?
How can I help?
How can I help?
That was the brainstorm question. What did you think of
That
it,
was it.
Travis?
It was really good because it allowed other people to it wasn't just from one aspect. I was really asking from a supervisor aspect, and what I found is that there was other needs that contributed to the company as a whole, and not
Yeah.
just to me supervising.
Okay. So what I would say about that question, Travis, is if you have a group of people who are comfortable with each other, who know each other, who trust each other, who have a sense of each other, have relationships, then that's a very broad question, right? It can work, right? If on the other hand, you had a group of people who aren't familiar with each other, don't work with each other, don't know each other, that might be kind of a paralyzing question because it's so big. The group might say, what do you mean by that? What category? I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to do with that. Within your group, I'm guessing it was people who knew each other. Am I right? Yeah, it sounds like that's why it was working. If it had been a group of people who didn't know each other, I would say they'd probably sit around looking for other people to answer it, not quite sure what the category is because but you had trust there because you know each other and you have a comfortable relationship. So that's a good example of the altitude. I see a couple of other things that people put in the chat. Fatima said, picture the ideal workspace using your five senses, right? So you could get a lot of ideas people could generate. How can we make the needs of our participants? How can we meet the needs of our participants in an effective, efficient way? Right. So you see there's some qualifiers on there, effective and efficient, right? When there was a law, how can you share anything positive with what we have discussed so far, right? Brainstorming on something positive. Um, so Silver was saying that's exactly what our supervisor was saying yesterday at the time. I just told her, I don't know, but now I have ideas, right? Okay, yeah. So so the other thing is to find a way to kind of keep the door open to new ideas. We'll talk a little bit about that. So figuring out the right question is an important part. But then we get into the 4 steps of nominal group technique. There are 4 steps. Step number 1, silent generation of ideas. So what we do here is we ask everyone to take the question and respond to the question by just making a list of ideas silently. We're having each of you write ideas on your own without any conversations, without any dialogue with anyone else. This is the best way for us to make sure we capture each individual's ideas before they start to get mushed in with other people's ideas. And when you ask people to silently generate ideas, they most often start talking with each other about their ideas. And so you have to facilitate this process and ask them to remain silent because as soon as they start talking to each other, they start engaging in some friendly judgment of each other's ideas. Yeah, well, what about this? Well, I don't know. Maybe I don't think so. We tried that once, didn't really work. Well, what about that? Okay, maybe. And then we lose ideas, right? Because people start filtering. They start filtering by interacting with each other. So what we want is just a raw, unfiltered list from each person in the room and for them to generate that. If you're in a room together, a lot of people like to do it on Post-it notes and have everybody put one idea per Post-it note, and they just kind of go through a whole big stack of Post-its with as many ideas as you can come up with. But give people a few minutes to silently come up with their own ideas. So that's the first step. Now, this ensures that everyone is engaged, right? Everyone in the room. I never do this and have people not write anything down. I've never had that happen. It doesn't happen. People write stuff down. So now everybody's on board. Everyone's doing something in relation to this brainstorming. There's no passive parties, which is what we want. We want to have everybody participating. So now everyone has their list. Then we want to collect these ideas, and we do this in a round robin report out fashion, which is to go around the room and collect one idea from each person and to keep going around the room until we have all of the ideas collected. If it's on a Post-it note, they can read it and put it on the board, or they can read it if you've written the notes and somebody can scribe it on a board or something. But we go around the room in a circle and we get everyone to participate. This is a way to do it instead of having one person share all of their ideas and then the next person share all of their ideas. One of the things that happens if you have people go one at a time, so let's say we're doing this and Lisa goes and has 7 ideas and puts them all up on the board. And then Maria says, well, Lisa took all my ideas. Oh, okay. I guess you're out. You don't get to participate. Well, you kind of did, but you didn't get to put something on the board. We want everyone to be up there. And it also, Lisa has a certain worldview on this. Maria's worldview or Carrie's or Leo's worldview might be a little different on this question. So we don't want to just put big chunks of ideas together. We want to toss salad of mixed stuff, right? So one person at a time, one idea at a time, going around and around until we get a whole big list, whole big mixed list of all these different discrete ideas up on the board. The key here, the key rule is no judgment, which means nobody gets to say anything while we're reporting these. If you're not sharing an idea, you're not talking, right? The idea gets shared, we put it on the board. Next idea, next idea, next idea. And that includes positive judgments. Some people say, well, why can't we do that? That's supportive of each other. Because I'm guessing that you're not going to say that's a great idea to every idea that is shared. You're only going to say it to the ones that you like, which is the equivalent of doing a thumbs down to the other ideas. It's still a form of judgment, which creates a certain reactivity in the room, and people will be less likely to share certain things or more likely to share other things. It's an influence that we don't want. We want people to feel neutral and supported with whatever they say. So I mean, I suppose if you could get the entire room to say, thanks for sharing that idea every time anybody shares an idea, that would be cool. But I don't think that that would work out. It'd feel a little silly after a while. So best thing to do is just not talking. Everybody just shares their thing. We put them up on the board. So we get all the ideas up on the board. And it might look something like this, right? We just kind of put them all up there. Good tip is to put numbers on them so that you can refer to them as you go forward as numbers rather than reading them, because that can be a little bit tedious to have to read them each time. Another tip is when you're asking people to write down their ideas in the beginning, ask them to keep them short. I like to say bumper stickers, 5 to 7 words, right? Simple ideas are the things that people can understand and the things that people can support. So try to keep your ideas short. It also prevents people from putting 2 or 3 ideas onto one idea. Sometimes folks will merge a bunch of ideas into what they think of as a singular idea, but it's actually multiple. And if you keep them short, it's less likely that that will occur. Okay, that moves us to step 3, where we have discussion for clarification. Discussion is where often the thing can go off the rails related to that judgment question, because now we're going to discuss them. So people say, oh, okay, this means that I can say if I like it or not, or why I think it's good or why I think it won't work. Well, note that this title of the slide says discussion for clarification. And clarification is the only thing we're doing. What does it mean? Do I understand it? If I do, good. If I don't, we need to have some explanation so that I can understand it. I need to understand all of the ideas on the list in order to then move on to step 4. So this is simply going through the entire list and asking if anyone in the room needs any clarification on any of the ideas. Do you understand number 1? Do you understand number 2? Do you understand number 3? If anyone says, no, I don't quite get what 3 is, person who created number 3, who is that? Oh, it's you. Okay, could you please explain number 3? Give us a little more language so that we understand what 3 is. And we go through the whole list to make sure that everybody in the room understands every item on the list. Again, very important to facilitate the process to avoid any kind of judgment, positive or negative. And sometimes it's really hard to facilitate a process where you're asking people not to share positive judgments, because typically that kind of supportive message like, hey, that's great, I'm really glad you shared that, is the kind of thing that we would be encouraging all the time, right? In this case, it's not helpful, again, because you're only going to do it for some ideas. So we want to reserve that. What I do if people keep interjecting with judgments, sometimes positive, often trying to be constructive, and it's rare that people are trying to shoot other people down. That's usually not going on. I will say to them, listen, we're going to do the judgment part And if you call it the judgment part, it gets people a little self-conscious about it. So that can be helpful, right? It is a judgment, positive or negative. We're going to do that in the next step, right? And 4, that's where we're going to vote. That's where we do judgments. So let's hold it until then. That can usually help people. So they're less likely to feel the need to judge early because people want to be helpful and to give some impressions or opinions because they think it's helpful. We say, well, it's actually not helpful right now, but hold on to that because we're going to do that in a little bit, which takes us to that last step. So step 3 is you kind of do clarification where we have any questions. You can also clean up the list if you have some ideas maybe that are the same idea. If they're identical, put them together. If they're not exactly the same, though, leave them apart. Okay. So then that takes us to 4, which is voting. This is where we do judgment, right? You're going to vote on your favorite ideas. I usually use this equation of 10 to 15% rule, which means give people votes that are the equivalent of 10 to 15% of the items. So if there's 20 items, that's 2 or 3 votes. If there's 40 items, that's 5 or 6 votes. That seems to be a good ratio, which gives people some choices without giving them too many choices, but giving them enough, right, to share opinions for several items. So we're going to ask them to vote for the best ideas. The simple criteria, and I'll do a little bit more detail on this in a minute, is return on investment. What's the best idea, the one that we can effectively do, it will work, and it won't require too many resources, right? How hard is it to do, and what kind of an impact will it have? And then you can think about how you want to do the voting. Do you want the voting to be private, where each person votes by writing down the numbers or something like that? Or do you want to have it be public, where people sort of raise their hand and have you count in the room? If you have issues of some power dynamics in the room, you might lean toward private voting because you don't want people to influence each other. If you find that this is a very kind of open, trusting group where there isn't that kind of an influence so much, and you want to kind of be observing how people are thinking about the ideas, then you might lean toward public voting. I will say, often there are power dynamics. There are power dynamics in every group. So I tend to lean toward private voting because it just kind of keeps that a little cleaner. But some folks like to do the public voting because it starts the conversation. Like, oh, I know who's interested in the things I'm interested in, that kind of thing. So you could kind of choose which way you want to do the voting. So you go through, we've all done that, kind of put the stars or the dots on the items on a board, sort of a voting. That's one strategy for voting. We've also all seen one individual watch what someone else does and then go around behind them and put their votes on the same stuff, which is an indication of some significant influence. In that case, if you see that happening, it's a little late at that point, but we'd say, oh, probably private voting for a group that where that happens, because I want you to have your own votes. I don't want you to be voting in the direction that's influenced by another party in the room. So, and I'm not suggesting that that's a terrible thing that there's influence, but the whole point here is to really get the individual opinion, right? Not and build the consensus off of those individual opinions. All right, so we pick some ideas that may have the highest number of votes. Then we might have some dialogue to get to consensus about how we're doing, which idea we want to implement, which idea we want to move forward with. Sometimes it's clear, there's a strong majority. Sometimes you have 2 or 3 ideas that get a lot of votes, then you might have a second round of voting or some kind of a dialogue to talk about what's the best way to proceed. A couple of tips, I already talked about some of these. The silent generation, keeping it silent, avoiding the discussion and judgment. Keep the list neat and orderly. That's really important to try to do that. Really try to give people that nice 10 to 15% voting. And when it comes to the choice, here's a simple grid that I like to use when people say, well, how do we pick the ideas that we like the best? I say, well, use this 2x2 matrix here. How much of an impact will it have? And how easy will it be to do it? And you see the green smile up in the upper left. It's easy and it has a high impact. That's the kind of stuff we want to do. And you see the frown in the lower right. If it's difficult to do and has a low impact, we definitely want to avoid it. And then there's the 2 maybes, right? The other 2 are kind of the maybes. And I like to add these hopes and fears questions. Well, there's something that's easy to do. It has a low impact. What's your hope? What's your fear about doing that one? And then there's something that's difficult and has a high impact in the upper right. What are you, how, what are you hopeful of? What are the risks related to that one? That tends to be the more high risk one, but it's a maybe because it may really pay off for you. So this is just a grid to think about putting things in these four boxes. Like when I choose ideas, which box does it fit in? I mean, I'm usually encourage people to do simple things to get started when you're making changes or improving things. And of course, we try to do the simple things that are going to have the most impact, right? That's sort of a logical return on investment attitude. All right, so that is um, what nominal group technique looks like. What I'm going to do is I'd like to spend a few minutes kind of sharing the process with you and doing a little bit of an exercise around nominal group technique, just to kind of give you a feel for what it's like. But first, I want to see if we have questions because I've been talking a lot. So, questions do people have as I've been going through this, or comments about this? Have you used it? Does it seem like the steps make sense to you? Anybody say, how come we can't just let people do their own thing? Why do we have to structure it like this? Sometimes people ask me that question. I think people can manage it without all that structure. I'll answer that question because it comes up a lot. Mostly yes, but what we're really doing is we're trying to protect the voice of those who might not feel like they have as much power or influence, who might also be the folks who might process their information a little more slowly. We're trying to protect that voice, right? The powerful people, they don't need any help, right? They're going to get their stuff on the board no matter what. The people who are quick, influential, powerful, etc. Yeah, no matter how you do it, they'll be fine. But there's all these other people, and we're not doing this in a way because we're trying to protect them. That's really not our job. We're trying to protect their ideas, right? We want to make sure that their ideas get shared. Scott has a comment.
Yeah, I was thinking about I actually talked a little bit about a similar idea. Sometimes in my role, I in an outpatient addictions um, environment, and so I'll be in some of the outpatient groups, getting to kind of know and meet people there, and just sitting in on some of the um, material. And so some of the stuff that was gone through yesterday, I was just asked about feedback. I think some of the questions that were being posed are really open ended, and this wasn't a brainstorming to do change in company culture or anything like this, but it's just a group of people. And when it's experiencing so much open-endedness, people get anxious about how they're going to look about answering things. And these are some personal beliefs sometimes, stuff like that, versus like, and the suggestion I brought up was maybe, having that silent generation in the beginning, like maybe there's a worksheet and people fill it out on their own and they get a little bit of confidence to then share. And I like that idea of kind of some non-judgment idea generation. I think that could be applied in multiple settings. So I personally like that model.
Yeah, well, I like what you're saying, Scott, about a worksheet. If you do this asynchronously, that is just, not in real time in a meeting, you can put the question on a worksheet or send people a poll with one question with a bunch of potential answer slots on the poll, right? Here's the question and fill in as many answers as you can come up with. And people can do it on their own time. There's no pressure. They're very much doing it individually, right? They're silently generating, doing their own thing. And then it plays to everyone's strengths in terms of giving them as much time as they want to be able to consider their ideas. And then they share them back by responding to the survey or the poll. And then you aggregate that whole list, and then you have a big list, and then you can do the next steps. And you don't even have to do it in a meeting. You could say, okay, everybody, here's our list. Check any of the items that you don't understand. That part can be a little bit time consuming because then you have to go find the people who shared those originally and get the information back. But as a start before a meeting, to bring the generated list, the aggregated list of all the ideas from the survey into the meeting room with everyone and say, okay, we've got your list. Everyone shared their ideas. Here's 17 ideas that you all came up with. Now we're going to do clarification, to make sure everybody understands them. We already did the first two steps, so now our meeting will be shorter. We'll just do the second two steps, clarification and then voting. So that can work really nicely. And it does give everyone a chance to share in a way that fits for them. Thanks for sharing that. Leo, what were you thinking?
Just a question. What are the skills with reflective listening? What you heard at the meeting, what you saw at the meeting, and how do you present them so you don't offend a lot of folks, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, so if you mean in the process of doing the brainstorm and having people share their ideas and reflective listening?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a good question. It clarifies the process a little bit. We're really trying to limit the reflection related to the sharing, because the reflection will do a couple of things. It will slow down the process, and we're trying to generate volume, right? And if we take some time with some reflection of the ideas as they're being shared, it will slow down the process, and it might make it difficult for us to get all the ideas. We want to have it be a relatively fast pace, like, give me an idea, give me an idea, give me an idea, give me an idea, next, 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 thank you, next, thank you, next. And just keep working our way through. So we really want to reduce reflections. Reflections also, I sometimes get into a little bit of a habit where I start reflecting and positively reflecting, and it's actually problematic, because what I'm doing is I'm thumbs upping some ideas, but not all of them, because I'm not having the same level of reflection for all of the ideas. So in that case, we really just want to say thank you, honor the idea by thanking them, move on to the next one. So we really don't have a lot of reflection. When we do the clarification, we really then again only we're reflecting for information, not anything else. And then when we get to judgment and we do the voting, we might after that have the opportunity for reflection. If we have 2 or 3 or 4 ideas that received a lot of votes, then we might collectively be engaged in dialogue around the ideas and exploring them together. But for the most part, in the first steps, we're kind of sticking with just the concrete business of working through the sequence, which is sometimes awkward for folks who are very used to reflective listening approaches to sharing of information and responding to the sharing of information. A lot of you are really geared toward responding in real time to what people are saying. And in this case, we want to limit that. So you kind of have to be mindful of that as you're doing it. It's good comment. Any other questions? All right, so I'm wondering if any of you are thinking about anything in particular that is something that is a key issue for you that you're working on right now. Let me actually share screen. Actually, as I'm looking at my time, I might not try to do one because we did a nice deep dive into it. What I might try to do is just share with you an idea, an orientation here. So let me just show you something on the screen. All right. If you were in a meeting, say you were in a Zoom meeting, you could just make a simple spreadsheet like this, where you just put the question at the top of the page. All right, just making things up here. How can we improve the experience of people during the first meeting with us? And then you get people to silently generate, give them a few minutes, and then you start going around. In this case, I would just go around the Zoom meeting and say, Mark, give me an idea. Vicky, give me an idea. Stacy, Lisa, and I would just call on you one at a time. And then I would just type them into the box as they were shared. One of you might say, give them something to drink, right? Offer them a water. Some of you might. What else could we do? We could say we could have a nice waiting room experience if you have a waiting room. Now, it could be a number of different things, right? So you could kind of go through a list of things. You could keep your cats at hand so that people could enjoy your cats. I don't know why I thought of that. Um, so this is what you would do. Now, imagine doing this, And then you would want to make sure that you're not judging them, that people are just sharing them. You're collecting it, saying thank you. If you had 10 people in a room, how many ideas do you think you would get? Depend on the topic, of course, but what do you think if you had, or I should ask a better question. How many people do you think you'd have it around the table? And do people generally, when you do brainstorming, do they come up with a bunch of ideas or is it a small number? What kind of numbers are typical for you? Put it in the chat if you want to.
I would say at least two per person, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good minimum standard to have multiple ideas from everyone who's in the group. Anybody else have a thought?
I think the average would be like 5, because I know
5.
there's people who are going to have 10, and then some that have 2.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I try to nudge the group toward as many as possible when they're silently generating their ideas. If you see people seem to be slowing down or stopping, say, "Hey, come up with some others." They can be out there, they can be all over the place. We just want anything you can think of related to this topic. So keep coming up with as many ideas as you can. Sometimes it will reflect the question. If people are only doing a very small number of ideas, like 1 or 2 ideas, then the question might be a little challenging or a little bit tight. It might need to be a little looser so that it's more flexible for their thinking. So that's something that you learn as you do more of this, is kind of crafting a question which gives people some opportunity for creativity, and they need encouragement. A lot of people need encouragement, so don't hesitate to ask people to keep going. And when you think you're done, come up with 2 more, right? And it's sort of like a personal trainer at the gym who says, "All right, I think you've got 2 more. I think you can, I think you can do 2 more," right? In an exercise or something. Obviously, you want to
I
make
have
sure
to
that's
laugh because my team is very opinionated
okay.
and have no problem sharing their opinions. So I think my problem would actually be getting too many and then having to kind of narrow down.
Okay. So having too many is not a problem. Having too many is great. So if your group came up with 75 ideas, that would be awesome. And then we put them all up on the board. Now, the processing of that many ideas can take a while, right? So then you have to think about the time and how much time you have for your meeting. But having a long list is a good thing. Now, then people might take more time to review the list in terms of clarification. It takes a while to read through all 75 of them. I like to read the whole list out loud when doing clarification. I like people to see it. I like people to hear it. Then they can process it with different parts of their brain. It allows them different opportunities to think about the information. And then we clarify as needed. And then the voting takes a while because people take a while to review 75 ideas, right? You also may be cleaning up the list if there are identical ideas or moving the identical items. When you first try this, maybe you need 90 minutes. Once you get some facility with it, you could probably do it within an hour. If you do the list ahead of time, then 45 minutes, right? When you get started. It shouldn't take that long because you've already got the whole list. And you can actually develop the whole list and share it back with them so that they come to the meeting with their questions, with the items that they don't understand already to go. So then that part is relatively quick. You just process through, give everybody a chance to ask questions about any ideas they don't understand, and then you're on to voting. So a half an hour can get those 2 things done. So that's a nice, efficient process. You don't lose out on the interaction because then you have the clarification stuff that's going to be happening. So I kind of like that model in a lot of ways because that's really where the group dynamic stuff comes into play when you're clarifying and then when you're voting and any dialogue after voting. The first parts are kind of just more mechanical, right? So it's okay to do those separately. So that's sort of a tip for efficiency. Any other thoughts or questions about what this might look like if you used a sheet like this or put it up on a board or anything else as you imagine yourself doing it? Anybody have any thoughts? It's super flexible, as I said. I would encourage you all to try it. And it is in the workbook, as was shared by Chris. There's a description of some of the key points that we shared today, and to try it with any kind of question that's an open question where you need ideas, and see how it goes. It's really a nice structure, and I think if you try it and experiment with it, you'll refine the model for how it can work for you, and it should be helpful. So maybe that's a good place to wrap up for today. I'd encourage you to give this a try with anything that's coming up or anything you want to talk about or ask your team or a group about. And it works with any population of people, regardless of their experience. It doesn't have to be people who are used to doing meetings. A lot of people do focus groups with people who are receiving services, for example, using this kind of a model as a way to get ideas from around anything from any group of folks. Works with people with all kinds of experience. Kids, you can do it with children, you can do it with anybody. So it's a good tool. Chris, any thoughts before we wind down for today?
I always suggest during this portion when we talk about nominal group technique to choose a low stakes thing to try it out on first. Like it's where, you're getting lunch for your staff. Try it on, where do we get lunch today?
Yeah.
Or tomorrow. So you don't have to, but try it on a low stakes thing just to get, so everybody feels really, really open to participating and realizes there's not much at stake, so that you can kind of elevate it and try it again when you're thinking about, our numbers have dropped. People aren't coming in. What do we do? So when you come to a higher stakes item, this is a practice effort, and you don't have to do the teaching of how to do nominal group technique on something more risky. And it's just I can't tell you more strongly enough how wonderful this is to really do participatory process with the nominal group technique. So, no matter how hard we try, when we're in a leadership position within a recovery setting, sometimes even unbeknownst to ourselves when we speak, people might withhold their opinion or their thoughts because they look to us as leaders, and in their minds, they might see us as always kind of knowing best. And so they might not even bring up their great idea. And this kind of levels that experience, that brainstorming session. So even if I'm running the recovery community organization, everyone who's around that table, from volunteers to board members to participants to family members, anyone around that table, what they contribute is just as valuable as me, the leader of the RCO. So think through, like, when I really need a lot of different opinions here, this is a great tool to pull out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Thank you for that. All right. So everyone go do some brainstorming with nominal group technique and tell us how it went. Really be cool if somebody did one this week on anything. Like Chris said, pick something simple.
Yeah, super simple. Yeah. Don't overthink it. Just try it out and see how your team responds. And then we'll meet next week, and maybe we'll start the session with somebody sharing where they used it.
That'd be great. Let's try it. Let's go for that. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next week. All right.
All right. Thanks so much.
Be well. Bye-bye.